Hello everybody and welcome back to RP1. Unfortunately, this will be the last RP1 for a little while. I'm still going to keep on it, but I've been running into a lot of problems with the Impact the Moon contracts, and so I think I need to just get myself a little more familiar with this next stage in RP1 before I have anything that are really worth showing. So instead, today we're going to focus on one of our last few X-Plane contracts, and that is the high altitude flight. We still have the Mach 1 and the Mach 2 contract, so that is going to be a challenge, and we may end up doing that episode in between the times as well. But in the month of October, we're going to be doing something a little different, so this will be all of the RP1 for now. What you're seeing me do here is time warping ahead, so that way we completed the lunar communication science node, so now we have the ability of upgrading the tracking station. I've been kind of pushing for this because when I was doing my tests for lunar impact, not being able to have maneuver nodes was a little difficult, so I kind of put my eggs in that basket. But of course, while doing that, I've been kind of neglecting the X-Plane program, and the deadline for that is coming up pretty soon. So we're going to go ahead and take all the available relevant contracts, such as the Karman line, the high altitude optional, and the stratospheric research. We're also going to pick up the hypersonic, but like I mentioned, we're not going to be able to build a plane to handle that right now. So let's go ahead and hop here into the spaceplane hangar. First thing we're going to end up doing is we're going to grab the X1 cockpit, but that is not the correct one. We are going to need the Mach 1 cockpit, and that is the one that we recently unlocked with the hypersonic flight tech node. So now I'm going to try to build a little bit of a procedural plane at first, but eventually I'll kind of change my direction. But we are going to use these tanks to build out our body in 3 segments, and we're going to use the XLR-99, this big hefty engine that powered the X-15 plane in real life, so I think it should be more than capable for our job. So now I'm kind of adjusting. I have 3 different sections here, so one section to basically house the engine itself, which we have as a hollowed cone that we can kind of adjust the back of there. And then we have a center tank, which is going to be the majority of the body's fuselage. And then we have the first tank that was attached, which is kind of the adapter between the cockpit and the body. So that is the setup that we've got going there. We have these as gridded tanks, so to be as light as possible. As you see here, extending out the center tank to the appropriate amount of fuel, the appropriate burn time was just too big of a feat, so we are going to actually make it a little bit thicker so we don't have to extend it as far. We're also going to adjust the amount of fuel that goes into the front and back ends to kind of compensate. See, this is a much better length of body for the type of plane that we're creating, so I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and put some procedural wings on here. Once again, I am in a glitch for some reason that the defaults of some tail fins that I made a long time ago never changed, and so every time I bring in a new wing, no matter what, it's going to be that. And with my control surfaces, it's this tiny paper thin control surface, and that's just my default. That's what it gives me every single time, and I don't know what mod causes that bug. I don't know how to address it. I'm not even sure how to describe it, so yep, it's just something I have to deal with in this, but hopefully you don't have to deal with that in yours. So we're just going to go ahead and thicken out the width of it to make it a legitimate surface and not some two-dimensional plane. There's going to be a lot of minute changes on the wings and the control surfaces, But the solution that I end up coming up with might just surprise you. But here I'm creating a little platform for our tail fins to sit on, so it's not just directly against the body of the airplane. And that also gives our control surfaces a little bit of room to wiggle and move around the base of it. So we're gonna just copy that other airplane wing, and then we are just going to resize it so that way it works as kind of like a little end cap. I'm not entirely sure if this is necessary, but I saw Calvin MacLeod do it way back in the day, and it just makes sense to me to have that kind of aerodynamic wing thing. So, and if you are not familiar, Calvin MacLeod is probably the best authority on building X-planes and, well, you know, a lot of planes in general. But if you are wanting to build these kind of things, I highly recommend checking out some of his tutorials. Honestly, I owe most of my plane design to said tutorials, but I've tried to kind of do things my own way if I can, where I can. But generally speaking, there's only so many ways to design a plane, and sometimes the best way is designing it after something that works. I unfortunately wasn't really doing a lot of homework, as I call it, RP1 homework at the time. And RP1 homework is essentially just going through history and learning about different planes that we used during this time period, and what kind of engines they used and what kind of flight stats that they had. I talked through a little bit of what I wanted to mention, and that is I colored the wings and the surfaces a little early here because it actually helped out a lot to line them up. By having the colors there, I was able to better get them situated. Anyways, I'm just copy and pasting to make my tail fin. This is not the best design, and it has yet to be tested, and you'll see in a little bit what happens. But there's not going to be an extended cut on this episode. Honestly, there wasn't enough test flights to kind of warrant it. So we're just going to kind of skip through there, and I'll show you what we ended up coming up with. But for now, we're going to try to work on getting these control surfaces on the wings. And that's going to take a little bit, and it's going to be a lot of just back and forth trying to finagle the right shape out of it, the right rotation, and double it up to make them both even. I copied the control surfaces from the back, hoping that the newly copied piece would be completely flat, but it too had that weird rotation. But this time I got a much better rotation on it, and I feel a lot closer to it being in the right size and position. So we're gonna go ahead and kind of finalize this piece and then duplicate it. And I'm spending so much time on here is because I want to keep both control surfaces roughly the same size. I feel like that would just work a lot better, so that's why I took the time to make them even in width. But now I have to make sure that they match up on the plane's wing, and then match up with each other. Then I'll bring the wing down there to kind of fit. And there we go. We've got it mostly situated. I'm going to go ahead and throw back this end cap. Throw that back on there. Yeah, having the colors that separates each different piece of it really helps when you're trying to line it up and shape it correctly. And if we see here, our center of lift is way, way, way back. And we have no danger of it ever falling in front of the center of mass. But that's okay. We're not trying to do very much flying with this. We're not trying to take off from a runway. We're simply trying to point this as upwards as we can to get as much height as we can. This is essentially just a rocket. Just, you know, a rocket with a cockpit and hopefully a way of landing. Speaking of which, we are going to throw on some air brakes as well as some parachutes. Some drogue chutes to slow us down if we need to on the runway. And having these air brakes are going to be crucial for when we attempt to come back from the run or onto the runway, because most tests that I've done of planes thus far, I end up coming in way too fast. So the air brakes will do a good job. As I mentioned earlier, I ended up doing something different with the wings, and that is I threw them out entirely. I went with some stock Kerbal wings and some stock Kerbal control surfaces. I was just a little frustrated. My wings did not have the surface area and the control in the test flight that I wanted, and eventually they ended up breaking off, and I was a little frustrated because at this point I had spent a lot of time on the orbital aspect, the rocket aspect, trying to get a small probe to the moon. And so I was starting to lose a little patience with Kerbal and RP1 and realism. Well, I guess not RP1, but the realism overhaul I was getting a little frustrated with. And I'm like, you know what? This is still Kerbal. Yeah. At the end of the day, this is very much still Kerbal Space Program. So we're just going to do what works. I'm not trying to do a historical role play. And so I'm sorry if this offends some of you. But just look at those wings. Look at those beautifully glorious wings. And you know what? If it works, it works. And, well, you'll see soon. But, yeah, we're going to be doing a couple test flights of these. As you see, our center of lift is still far behind the center of mass. And now that we have a little more substance on our wings, our landing gear can go a little farther out and be good, which will make for a nice stable landing. Alright, so let's throw this into our simulator, see how it runs. And then after the simulation, I decided that I wanted a little more control, a little more pitch control. So I'm going to throw these standard canards on there, give them pitch control. And then I'm going to play around with wing shape here, but I don't end up changing it at all. What I will do, though, is throw on some more air brakes for more slowing down capabilities. Yeah, see, there's a lot there, but the surface area is just a little too much for me. I needed to make sure that this was still light enough that it can achieve its goal. There we go, so let's just double up on the air brakes, but we're going to put these a little more horizontally. And we're going to make sure that we have the correct science, or rather just any science that we can do for our high altitude flight. After our last test, I became very happy with it, so let's go ahead and give it some coloring. Not much to do because it's just the body of it, since the plain wings are stock, but we will throw on a little decal to denote what type of plane it is, and it's the High Altitude XP1. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm actually excited for this mission. As you may have noticed, this is actually a relatively short episode compared to some of the previous ones, but that's because, I mean, the flight went out pretty well. The build didn't take all that long. It would be too much to try to stack in another type of airplane mission here, or the many attempts that I failed at getting orbital and getting moonbound, but nonetheless, pretty happy with this little plane. And like I mentioned before, we're not giving up on RP1. We still have some more plane missions to do, and we're definitely still trying to push for the moon. So I'm going to take a second here, and I'd like to kind of get a little more progress out of my airplane hangar crew. I want them to build a little faster, so I'm going to go ahead and scrap the plane that we had in there before, the jet plane. Because we're just not going to use it anymore. For the contracts we need, the cockpit itself is just not capable, so we scrapped that. We're also going to hire a whole bunch of new people, which will hopefully make the hangar, or the, excuse me, the high altitude plane come out faster. And then there's not really a lot to do. Honestly, if you're playing this game to kind of be the most efficient, right now I should be in the VAB designing my orbital capable rocket instead of time warping to my plane missions, because all this time that we're spending time warping, we're not making progress, basically. I went ahead and upgraded the mission control because, once again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I wanted to have maneuver nodes, and hopefully by the time we get a rocket capable of hitting the moon, we'll be able to fully utilize those maneuver nodes. But anyways, we have our plane is made. We now need to get Amanda Bennett into flight school so she can be trained in the mission. Thankfully, she's already trained in the cockpit, so all she needs to do is this. Normally, the mission, at least with the X1 cockpit, the mission was only a day, but for this one, the mission's going to take significantly longer. So instead of prepping the plane for air launch now, we're going to go ahead and time warp forward to try to match up the prep for air launch completion with Amanda Bennett's program completion. And then that way we can kind of maximize the time as best we can when we can. So that little effort. So now it is time. I went ahead and prepped for air launch, and that completed pretty quickly before the class did, but it was all for naught because it's the middle of the night right now, and I don't want to launch a plane in the complete darkness. However, we do opt to go for a more dawn approach. So as the sun comes over the horizon, we're going to go ahead and prep our air launch. We tested it out, and 450 was about the sweet spot that we wanted. We're going to load Amanda Bennett up, give her a parachute just in case, and go ahead and launch. We get a nice clean ignition, always nice to see. We've got the sun at our back, which means we may have a little bit dark of a touchdown. I was hoping that by the time we reached our destination, the sun would be a little bit higher than it ended up being, but nonetheless, I was still pretty happy with the early morning colors we were getting. So now I'm pitching as far upwards as I can while still kind of pitching forwards, so that way we're most efficiently breaking through the atmosphere. I had 141 seconds of burn time, but we're not going to use all of it. I only want to cross the 100-kilometer line, which is the Karman line, which is what is required by the contract. As you see here, we had 18 more seconds of flight, but in all my tests, it was a hard enough re-entry as is. I didn't want to add even more altitude to that, which would cause me to come in even more fiery of a rate. But as you see here from our missions, we completed quite a few contracts and milestones. Time warp ahead until we pass the Karman line, and we are now on our downwards trajectory, and we have completed that contract. So all we need to do now is land safely, either at the KSC, ideally, or if we splash down in the water, as long as we do so with the plane, or at least the cockpit, intact, and Amanda Bennett safely alive. So we have a pretty aggressive pitch down, and I'm trying to balance out as much as possible. Having these canards on there did help out a lot, keeping ourselves balanced. In every single one of our test flights, they actually ripped off around this point. Once it got heated up, they just burned and came completely off, and we landed without them. So I was a little surprised to see them still stick around here. The re-entry that we did was probably the best case scenario. We barely had any heating on there, so led me to think that we could have possibly gone a little higher, spent a little more time, a little more science, but honestly, after the Kerbals that I've lost in my series recently, I was hesitant to needlessly, recklessly risk her. The 450 kilometers from the launch site was, like I mentioned, kind of the sweet spot here. As you see, we don't have the ability of starting our engines on again, so we're going to be gliding the rest of the way. But besides the fact that our angle is incredibly aggressive, we're pretty much set to hit the base of the runway. Gonna go and air brake a little bit. We're only going 300 meters per second and falling, but I did want to kind of make that drop a little faster. It is very dark here, and it's only going to get darker. I'm going to do a little camera editing magic, a little adjustment. It's not very good. I'm not very good at color balancing, but I will adjust out the colors so that way in a few moments it won't be the pitch black screen that it was for me. But for now, I'm really enjoying these soft orange reds that the sunrise give on the plane. But that being said, this is where everything goes dark, so let's go ahead and fix that a little bit. So yeah, like I mentioned, the colors are a little funky, but at least you can get a good idea of our approach. And now our angle isn't nearly as extreme as it was before. We're still going relatively fast, but with our air brakes and our parachutes, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to slow down in time. The real question is will we have the right angle when we come in? Are we going to be able to actually land on the runway, or are we going to miss it entirely? Amanda Bennett seems to be having a pretty good time. She seems pretty confident in her abilities, so I'm going to be confident in her as well. Once again, this is the XLR-99, or the XL-99? One of those. This powered the X-Plane, the X-15, and brought it to many successful missions, and for us, brought us to our first. And with that, we put all three wheels down. Our brakes hit a little harder than we liked, and we flipped up a little bit, but Amanda had control, and we once again touched down safely on Earth, completed our programs, or not our programs, but completed our contracts, completed our goals, and lived to tell the tale. So all in all, pretty excited, pretty happy. It was a pretty good episode. Pretty good time in general. I really do have a lot of fun playing RP1. As frustrating as it is, when it goes right, it is just, it's such a great feeling. So now that she did a fairly interesting mission, she's going to stick around for an extra 220 days, which is nice because we want our pilots as long as possible. Before we end the episode, we're going to take a quick peek into our science to see what we can get. We now have 12.8, which is more. We're reaching a part where our science is becoming limited because we've already done most of the experiments available. So we're going to have to choose our parts wisely. We don't need crew survivability because we're not planning on bringing any crews anytime soon. But what we will do is solid rocket engines all the way up to the 1959-1960 ones, because we had a lot of good luck with the SRBs in our previous playthrough, and I think we should utilize some of that again. Just even having a higher thrust to weight ratio right off the launch pad can mean a huge difference in Delta V. So I think by being able to utilize those for our orbital missions and our lunar impactors, hopefully we can actually successfully complete those contracts. And like I mentioned, once again, we have a few more X-Plane contracts to complete, so that is something that we'll be visiting soon. And we already have an extra high-altitude plane ready to go. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be doing something a little differently in October, so This will be the last RP1 video for a little bit, but I will return probably sometime in November, and hopefully I will have made a lot more progress since then. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more RP1. If you did, please consider subscribing, drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.